So, nun möchten wir gerne anfangen. Ich habe mir wieder eine Hilfe
I
geholt.
would like to begin, and I again got myself a little helper. She'll be signing the introduction, and there'll be a translation. Go ahead. My name is Jana. I'm 11 years old. 11 years. And now, we'll have Tim.
Danke.
The introductions at this conference are the best anywhere in the world. I'm so happy to be here, seeing some of you again and some of you for the first time. We've been here for a while now because we had the professional conference, but we really, really look forward to the family conference because that's why we come. Professionals, sure, they need a lot of training, which most of you could give them. But what's really important is the families and have a chance to meet with you. Unfortunately, it turns out there's sometimes a language barrier. It turns out my high school German teacher was right. I should have spent more time studying my German. But that was so many years ago that I've forgotten most of it. But I regret that. And also, we Americans are so incredibly lazy when it comes to learning foreign languages. I'm really kind of embarrassed by the whole thing that we think everybody should speak English. Of course, it makes our lives easier, but it's crazy to think that we should all speak English. So anyway, I'm really glad to be here, and I'm glad to talk about this topic. I'm a psychologist, and I graduated from my doctoral degree in 1979. So that was a few years ago. Jacob with CHARGE syndrome was born in 1989. I didn't sign up for that one. You know, I signed up to become a psychologist. That was my intention. I wanted to help families who might have children with disabilities, and that would be great. It never was part of my life plan to be one of those parents that needed that help. No, that was for other people, thank you very much. But since I was a psychologist, and my wife was also a psychologist, we figured, well, you know, what can we do given our background and training? And I think it's the first time in history that having parents who are both psychologists was a good thing. Because I think we actually have done a pretty nice job of anticipating what was going on with Jacob and figuring out, using our training, you know, how we might be able to work with this. And it's been an amazing educational experience for me. I never would have learned even 50% of the things I've learned if it had not been for Jacob. I'm a much better psychologist, much better teacher. I have many more amazing stories than I would have been without that. And honestly, for me, having Jacob in my life as my son has been the greatest blessing of my life, because it's given me opportunities to learn and to travel, to talk to people I never would have had without that. So it's ended up being a really wonderful experience for me. But I do know the pain, the struggles, the isolation, the loneliness, the helpless feeling that we still experience today. I mean, right now we're struggling with what to do with Jacob's back. He has a lot of curvature in his back. It's a time we do something different than we've done before. So I'm just mentioning that because there's always a struggle. It's never easy. But in my experience, that doesn't make it bad. It's just unique and different and in many ways enlightening. I know that this conference, any conference on Charge, is a roller coaster experience for people who attend, especially first-time parents. Because it's often the first time you've ever seen another child with Charge or been with all these people who share something very special and unique. I mean, in a sense, if we could communicate better, you're all my best friends because we have this important link that binds us in very significant ways. But also when you're in the conference, you're being overwhelmed by all the issues. You're reminded about all the problems, all the challenges that you may face. And that can be very discouraging. So I very often, first-time parents in particular will say, yeah, roller coaster, it was up, I was up and I was down, I was up and I was down. But overall, very positive experience, and we hope that's what everybody has. That's a picture of my wife with Jacob from a number of years ago when he was quite tiny. He was less than a year old at that point. And when I started thinking about what I wish I'd known, yeah, there's the medical stuff, and I'm not going to talk about that very much. It's more the parenting stuff. What would have been useful for me to understand about how to be a parent that I know now, wish I'd known then? Sometimes as I look at my 5 hints or 5 tips, they seem kind of obvious, but as I go through them, it's not to insult you with the obvious, it's to remind myself how important each one of these things is in terms of raising a child. So if you think of it at least as a reminder, these things are central for all of us as parents, probably not exclusively with our kids with Charge, probably to a certain extent with all our kids. But the challenges are very different when you have a child with Charge. I do have an article coming out in the fall which is based on this presentation, although it's turned into more of a parenting guide with general parenting issues, because I think it's so important for us to know how to be a parent to a child with Charge syndrome. So my first tip, because I think this is so incredibly important, is that if you ask somebody what are the top 3 issues you should deal with in Charge, the top 3 are communication 1, communication 2, and communication 3. Without communication, we don't have a lot, right? And it's not just the child's communicating to us, which I think we often think about improving the child's communication. It's improving our ability to communicate back to our child. All behavior is communication, and so everything that we do in interacting with our child communicates to our child, and anything they do is communicating to us something about what's going on with them. David Brown, because he couldn't just be satisfied with communication, added on the distinctions: communication with oneself, communication with others, and communication with the world. And these are all important for anybody, right? Because we'd have to learn how to be in tune with ourselves and what's happening with our bodies, what's happening with our experience in our environment. But we also have to deal with the people who are in that environment. And then by extension, how am I going to be a person in the world? Because the world is fairly large, and we're all citizens of that, and we're dealing constantly with the larger environments. So you can broaden communication that way if you wish. But I do think that any way we can establish communication is incredibly important. So how do you communicate with a kid with Charge? You communicate, and I said baby because this was initially for new parents, and we added seasoned parents onto it. But don't forget that even if your child is deaf, blind, it doesn't matter. When we're communicating, we need to use full facial expressions. It's not only because they may pick up on some of those expressions, even if they have visual impairments, but it's also because we are experiencing in ourselves this relationship. And when I put on, oh, you're feeling, I don't know, I'm horrible. Actually, I think I would have been a great actor, but I can't do it on demand. But no matter what face I make, I'm registering it, right, in myself. And so it's extremely important. And there's no point in becoming very passive in our expressions, because then we're losing so much of the communication that's taking place. It's okay to do the cooing and the laughing as you would with any other baby or any other person. Well, I don't coo too often with my wife, but laughing good, right? Experience the full expression of ourselves in the relationship with the child. That's good stuff. Motherese. I don't know if you're familiar with motherese, but motherese is baby talk. Are you wanting to eat? Right? I mean, that kind of stuff, our range goes up and down, so we're very high. Hello, child, right? And so we're being overly expressive. Children really benefit from that in general, as they're learning to understand the nature of language. But all of our kids, even the kids with charge, can benefit from that, even if they can't hear it terribly well. It's still a part of your interacting with them, which they will sense, whatever level they can. Of course, with charge, touch is very important. A problem with touch, of course, is that our kids can be highly sensitive to touch. I mean, touch is such an important part of communication. We shake hands, we hug, we pat on the back, right? We do things to communicate our interest in one another through our touch. But of course, kids with charge can be very tactily defensive. They don't necessarily like touch. I can remember Jacob was maybe 3 months old, crying. We're walking around our house, carrying him, rocking him over the shoulder, back down. My father-in-law doing the same thing. I remember him walking around the park, and he got very frustrated. He gave Jacob back to me. I'm so frustrated. Finally, after probably doing this for a half an hour, I put him down. Immediately, he calmed. This is not the experience any parent wants, right? I'm supposed to be able to comfort you and hold you, and you're supposed to then settle, not when I leave you alone. And the mistake we made after that is we started leaving him alone, because he was perfectly happy to be on his back on the floor, playing with whatever toy was in the vicinity, and causing no problems for us. So leaving him alone, which was a huge mistake. It doesn't help to build that communication. On the other hand, we had to figure out how can we touch in ways that he can handle. And we did learn it has to be firm touch. Any light touch would drive him crazy, but good firm touch would actually work. So figuring out the kind of touch you can use. Jacob now, he lives in the house next door to us. He's 29. He's got caregivers 24/7 all the time. I'll go over and visit him, and our routine is to go sit on his couch. He will lie down on the couch and extend his legs over my lap, and I'll just rub his legs. And that's how we are communing with one another. It's all through touch. He does have a cochlear implant, but he doesn't like to wear it much, and he doesn't hear anything without it. So no point in, though I do talk to him, because I think it's important that we continue to talk, but the communication is coming through touch. This is not hard for me to imagine. Imagine you're in a foreign country and not understanding the language. It's a lot like that, though, with our kid. They're developing their own language to a certain extent, their own way of understanding the nature of communication. And I know how exhausting that can be. I lived in Denmark for a year when I turned 13 and went to Danish school and learned some Danish. And when I started learning German in high school, it just messed me all up. Remembering Fru versus Frau. I mean, this is really hard. But I got good enough with it that I could go back when I was 16 and travel a bit. But how exhausted I got, just having to speak and listen in Danish. I couldn't wait to go someplace where we can talk American. Am I right? I mean, sometimes you just need that. But that's the kind of what's going on all the time with our kids, isn't it? We're trying so hard to tune into their communication and build something that can be very exhausting. But we still have to do it. And the more we do it, the better we become. Now, what communication system should you use with your child? Well, the answer is learn the communication system that works best for your child. How am I supposed to know? You don't. I mean, it's through experience, it's through trying alternative methods. And often, actually, what we end up with is a combination of different methods. So with Jacob, he knows a few signs. He uses a few signs, although he's very lazy with his sign language. So they all almost look alike. So this is more for him, and this is finished for him. But when you ask him, more, finished, he goes, I don't know what that was. Come on, Jacob, tell me what that was. More, finished. But he does have and we can ultimately see which one he's talking about. So he recognizes probably 20, 25 signs, and he uses probably 8 to 10. So it's minimal, but it's good. When we discovered pictures and the picture exchange system, that opened up a whole new world for him, even though he's never advanced beyond one picture at a time. Although I've seen him put together 2 pictures. That was amazing. It's worked really, really well for him to ask for things that he wants to do and to look at schedules of what's going to be happening in the course of the day. He also uses a lot of, grabbing you and taking you to what he wants. And we've learned that. He also uses certain behaviors, and they're not necessarily deliberate on his part, but it expresses what's going on with him. So that if he has an earache, he almost always takes something sharp, sticks it in his neck, and wrenches his neck against it. Okay, doctor time. And the interesting thing is we can go see the doctor right after Jacob started doing that, and they'll say, ears look fine. We go back the next day, oh, ear infection. So Jacob's behavior is telling us there's something happening before it's actually even detectable. So learning to recognize that, and all his caregivers know all the various behaviors that indicate that he's not feeling well. And they'll actually call us and say, Jacob's showing lots of those pain behaviors, and then we know we need to address that issue. So there are lots of different ways that we can build communication. I've heard people say, oh, no, only use one system or the child will become confused. That's, baloney might not work here. That's silly, okay? No, use whatever combination, whatever systems send to be. The goal is communication, however you get there, right? So it doesn't really matter. So gestures, oral, sign, picture, mix them all up, build communication, find whatever works for the child to be able to express what's going on, and you are gradually learning to pick that up. It takes time, and you shouldn't feel bad if it's a struggle. His caregivers have been known to say, so Jacob was definitely telling me something by his behavior, and I couldn't figure out what it was, and he got frustrated with me, but eventually he got it across, and we figured it out together. And I think that's a good way of thinking about it. It's not always going to be clear. You're not a bad parent if you have no idea what his need is, because otherwise I'd be a really bad parent, because many times I have no idea really what he's trying to communicate. But we keep trying, and we keep putting ourselves in Jacob's situation and trying to build that relationship. Communication is all about relationships. I have heard parents say, well, my child has no communication. That is impossible unless your child is dead, right? Everybody's constantly communicating. All behavior is communication. So this is never the case. And when I say all behavior is communication, it doesn't mean that it's deliberately directed towards me to communicate to me, but I can read that behavior. I'm looking at it, my audience. Yay. And, there's a lot of intent looking at me. It hasn't turned to disgust yet, so I'm glad. But, I'm reading your behavior, and you may be trying to control it really well. Good luck with that, because I'm good at reading. So but I'm interpreting, and sometimes I'm interpreting totally wrong, right? I mean, I teach 3 times a week, normal semester. One of us for 3 hours, others for like an hour and a half each. And I think I understand what's going on with my students, and later I find out, No, we were all laughing, not at your joke, because you look so stupid today with your outfit. Okay, well, I didn't know that, right? But so you're making sense out of it as best you can, but it's not always accurate. But that's okay. The goal is to try, but the important thing is that the behavior is not random. The behavior has been chosen by the individual for whatever reason, internal state, external state, what they want at that moment, what their goals are. I remember a parent who said in an email, my child has no communication. The problem was the child was biting, right? And biting the fingers so badly they were bleeding. And she tried different things to stop it, but she kept saying, my child has no communication. I said, not true. Biting the fingers is communication. That's telling you something. Well, she wasn't so sure, so she pulled all the teeth, which I don't think was a good solution, right? So don't go pull your child's teeth. Your child is biting, and a lot of you will have kids who are biting their fingers. This is not uncommon in Charge, but it's not call for pulling teeth. There are other solutions. And once the child believes that nobody's communicating with them, they will shut down. Right? There's no point in tuning into a world where nobody's being responsive. So they'll come up with their attempts, and if they don't get any kind of reaction or response, they're just gonna go hide and do their own thing and turn more and more into their internal world, which is not where we want them. But often we have to deliberately pull them out of that world and say, no, now we're going to interact. When I go to Jacob's house, I mean, I'm dad, I can get away with things. Right, but I see him, and Jacob is, by the way, very low functioning in terms of charge. He's at the low end. But I'll go up to him and I'll grab his arms and put them around me, right? He won't spontaneously hug me, but he will keep his arms there for a moment. Or if he's lying on his bed, I'll go over and put his arm around me. He'll try to push me away, say, nope, arm around me. So he has to cuddle with Dad for a moment. I mean, I have to impose on him because it'd be easy to leave him alone. If all he wants to do is push me away, all right, I'll be hurt and I'll leave you alone. No. He really does care about me. I'm sure he does. I'm convinced of it. Every day I tell myself he does. No, but I can see it in his reaction when even though it's kind of subtle sometimes. Thank you, Jacob. As I've said, not all behavior is intentional, but we can still read it as in communication. And even if your child likes to withdraw, don't let them. Okay, very, very good. So that's what I wanted to say about communication. I haven't told you how to do it exactly, only that work with your speech language pathologist, work with your school team, use your own intuition because you really know your child better than anybody else, and insist on constantly being in communication with them. Communication is relationship. We want relationships with our children. It only comes through communication. Not verbal, right? It doesn't have to be verbal, although I do encourage you to be verbal, just because I think that helps you with communicating. But at some level, we have to have that relationship. All right, that was hint number one, or tip. The second one is routine. Now, there are people in the world who really like routine. I really do. I thrive on regularity. My wife finds that very boring. She says, I say, well, I'm very spontaneous, and that makes her crack up hysterically because I guess I'm not spontaneous. I think I'm pretty good. But you know, kids with Charge syndrome tend to be on the I really like routine end of it. There are lots of reasons for liking routine because it makes the world more predictable. I know what's going to be happening. And I have a little bit more control over my world if I know what I'm supposed to do in certain kinds of situations. That's a picture of Jacob at a Charge conference in Arizona, in the hot southwest of the United States. And it was a very complicated building to enter where the conference meetings were, and you had to go in one door and go down a long hallway, then you turn to your left, another long hallway, then you turn to your right, and then you turn to your left again, and at the end of that hallway was where the door to the rooms were. So Jacob did that once with being guided. After that, he just took off. He always knew exactly where he had to go and how he had to get there. He memorizes routines incredibly well because that's survival for him. You know, when I know where I am, where I need to go, how I'm going to get there. Not too long ago, one of his caregivers had to take him to the hospital for blood work. And the hospital is not laid out in any way that anybody would ever think about laying out a hospital, I don't think. You have to turn out so many different corners and things to find where the lab is. So April, who was his caregiver, was taking Jacob around trying to find the lab and not finding it, going all sorts of wrong places. And Jacob kept kind of pulling her. So finally she said, okay, Jacob, I'll follow you. He took her right to the lab, right? He knows because he's done this before. He's got it figured out. That's the importance of routine. So as I say, children with charge thrive on routine and predictability. And there's many ways that we can respond to that. And, you know, early on, they really want to know what the expectations are. Later, they may not care what the expectations in the world are, but initially, they're still interested in expectations. So we can teach them the patterns of life, how we go about our daily routine from getting up in the morning to going to bed at night. And one of the ways we do that is by establishing a calendar system. Tomorrow morning, Shanti will be talking, my doc student right here, will be talking about calendar systems kind of briefly, but enough that I think you can get an idea of the different ways that you can build routine into the child's life. It doesn't have to be the same thing every day. It needs to be a calendar system allows you to establish what's going to be happening that day. So you start out by saying, okay, now we're up. Now we're going to do, and you have we use pictures to communicate. You know, you're going to get washed up, you're going to eat your breakfast, you're going to go to your job site, you're going to come home. And then there are places for choices where he can choose, I want to be on my trampoline, or I want to go take a long bath, or whatever it is that he wants to do. And we also have routines around meal time. So cannot be independent in preparing a meal, but he can follow a routine where go get your bowl, right? Go to the refrigerator, get out the meal, pour it into the blender because it has to be pureed for him smooth. He can press the button for pureeing it. He can help to pour it into his bowl. He can put it in the microwave. And he's got this all on his iPad, actually, step by step by step by step. So as long as and he doesn't need those steps anymore, but he still kind of seems to enjoy checking it off after each step has been completed because it tells him what he needs to do. So calendar systems, routines, very, very helpful. Okay, as I say here, with a certain amount of chaos is quite natural. And I've 5 kids. It's a little chaotic. At one time I had 3 kids in diapers. I survived. But I spent all my time at home toileting. That's all I did. One to the next, to the next, to the next, right? Because by the time we had been through all 3, they were starting over again. So chaos is inevitable. And many people are quite comfortable with chaos. My youngest son seems to think chaos is just perfect for his life. You can't even walk into his bedroom because, no, you can't. I won't even try to describe it. That's fine if that's your life choice, but it's not going to work well with your child who has charge syndrome. So even though you might prefer it, might be comfortable with it, try to get routines yourselves, because I think your kid's going to do so much better when they have that routine that you're able to follow and able to impose the order on your existence. Whether that's comfortable for you or not. And it was easy for me, not easy for my wife. That's why I ended up doing most of Jacob's direct care at home, because if he had to be fed initially every 2 hours, right, through the gastrostomy. Okay, I can say, well, it's been 2 hours. Nancy, have you fed Jacob? Oh, no, I forgot. Can you do it? Sure. 2 hours later, hey, Nancy, I think it's time to be Jacob to be fed. Oh, yeah. Can you do it? Sure. 2 more hours, I just did it, right? And so I just kept doing it. And that was fine because, again, the routines were easy for me to acquire. Harder for her. Not that she can't do it. She's perfectly capable. But it was harder for her. Now, then you find your specialties, right? She did the doctor stuff. So she would take Jacob to the pediatrician because if I took him to the pediatrician, I'd come home and she'd say, so what did the pediatrician say? Lots of stuff. Well, what did they say about his ear? It's infected. So what medication did he prescribe? It was an antibiotic. But which one? Because there's only certain ones he can tolerate. I don't know, I think it started with an A. Right? So she'd do all the doctoring. There's no point in sending me, right? So you find your strengths, right? But it all has to fit within this kind of general routine so we know how we're going to handle things. When Jacob got sick, it wasn't a matter of who's going to take him to the doctor. We knew Nancy was going to take him. When he had to be fed, it wasn't a question of who was going to do it. We knew Tim was going to do it. Anxiety is something that people experience around uncertainty about what's going to happen. All right, and we think that anxiety is a huge issue in CHARGE syndrome. Shante here, again, my student, has a poster out there in English, but it's about anxiety in CHARGE, which is the subject of her research, because we're pretty sure that this is a major issue in the behaviors that many kids with CHARGE develop. You know, you think about what we want to do. So you came here, kind of an odd place. What will happen today? Well, there'll be a bunch of talks, right? There'll be some breaks. There'll be some other people here. And didn't you like reading the schedule? That gave you some comfort? Because I know, well, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. And please don't change the schedule because which we actually did yesterday, but that was okay. It was good. It was a really good change. But those things are difficult. I think my co-presenter was much more distressed than I was, one of our co-presenters. So what's going to happen today? What do they want me to do? Where will we sit? Where will we eat? Where are the toilets? I mean, these are kinds of things that we just don't know. Where are we going? And maybe you got that when you left from home to come here. Where are we going again? What's going to happen? What will happen when we get there? And very importantly, will I feel safe? One of the brilliant things about CHARGE conferences is that when your kid does their CHARGE stuff like this, we think it's terrific, right? Because all our kids are doing the CHARGE stuff. So nobody looks very strange or odd. It's just cute. I love the way he tilts his head. It's a vestibular kind of issue, I think, which is really interesting, and maybe some shoulder stuff going on. But so we get curious about it when we're comparing our kid to him and saying, well, yeah, Jacob preferred to be on the floor spinning around. So would you want to try that? But Jacob wasn't the only one on the floor spinning around. So I felt safe. Yeah, the world doesn't always make sense. CHARGE land does not always make sense. And it can be unpredictable for us because we never know what we're going to wake up to in the morning, right? So we like to know what's going on. What are we doing right now? Listening to a talk. What are we going to do next? There'll be some dinner. What did we just do? We had a coffee break. Now, so much of our conversation is around these kinds of issues. You know, when you go back home, well, what'd you do there? We listened to some talks. Oh, how was the food? Not bad, right? But it's this routine things in our lives that we have conversations around. And our kids with CHARGE need to have these conversations as well. And the nice thing about having a calendar system with cards, pictures, is at the end, you can go back through at the end of the day and say, remember when we got up and had breakfast? Remember when we played on the trampoline? Remember when we went to the grocery store? And you can rehearse what happened just the way we do at the end of the day anyway. So keep those kinds of things in mind. When we're not sure what's going to happen, we become anxious, and we often engage in behaviors which express our feelings. Now, most of us in here, adults, right? we've learned how to control our behavior to a certain extent. Not everybody. There's one person in the back who hasn't figured it out. No, I'm just kidding. But, so we control ourselves. So when we're anxious, we figure out how we handle that and look very appropriate. Our kids with CHARGE do not care about being appropriate, right? That's not really in their vocabulary. So they'll express their anxiety in all sorts of kinds of behavior. It can be aggression. It can be lashing out at somebody. It can be throwing themselves on the floor. It can be hitting their head. It can be biting their fingers. And those behaviors don't necessarily mean anxiety. That's one of the complications. We don't know what they might mean, but very often they will. Or your child will develop their own unique behaviors around feeling anxious. So figuring out how to help them deal with that anxiety leads to the issue of self-regulation, which I'm not going to go into any detail on. But we have learned to regulate ourselves. So when you're sitting here in a chair for a while and your body's getting uncomfortable, you've learned how to squirm around in your chair, reposition yourself so you get more comfortable. And that's a lot of regulating our bodily functions so that we are able to attend. And things like scratching your head or yawning or stretching, they're all things that we do to keep ourselves well regulated and tuned into things. Other ways we regulate ourselves is our feelings. So when you're very excited, you may not yell out and shout out in a room like this, but you know when you can do it, or you know how far you can go. When I'm feeling angry with somebody, how can I control that in such a way that our relationship is still productive, right? Because we don't want to be so angry that we ruin our relationships. We figured these kinds of things out. It has to do with our feelings, with our thinking, the way we make sense out of the world through our thoughts, our behaviors, controlling our behaviors, and keeping our body settled. That's self-regulation. Self-regulation then allows us to organize and manage all those things so that we can manage our day and meet our goals. Because if my goal is to learn something here at the conference that's not helped by not being able to attend, tune into what's being said, but being able to tune in means I have to control my emotions, I have to control my thoughts, I have to control my behaviors, and I have to control my body to make sure it's okay. This is really hard for our kids to learn. They don't learn incidentally. They don't learn by watching other people. They learn by direct experience. But we have to direct that experience so that they're picking this up. We have to provide the external support so that they can learn to self-regulate. We have to show them this is how we handle our emotions. This is how we keep ourselves motivated. This is how we behave in these situations. We'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow in David and Shanti, my presentation. But you can do, a whole day talk on strategies for developing self-regulation skills. The most important is to recognize that our kids are not learning that without us teaching them how to do it. So I will come back to that actually tomorrow. But a major component of dealing with all of this is routine. I can't overstress how important it is for your child to figure out the routine of their day. In some of the consultations already today, we've been talking to people upstairs about, well, what's it like when your child goes to school in the morning? What's their mood like, right? The emotional part of the regulation. What's their mood like when they come home? What do you think they experience during the day? All these things are so important because we get into the routine of how we do it. All right, belabored that. All right, discipline. I don't know if you know this song from South Pacific, I Can't Say No. If you don't, I can't say no. All right, now you remember it? We have to learn to say no. It is so easy to spoil a child with charge. It is easy, easy, easy. Because why wouldn't you? Right? Give them what they want, for heaven's sake. It settles them down. right? It makes them content. If they're demanding something from me, I can fight and fight and fight, or just give it to them. Of course, when you give it to them, you've taught them to fight and fight and fight because they will get it in the end. That is so hard to sort out because you can't use kind of typical discipline techniques maybe, and some of the situations they present you with are just not what other parents experience. You know, I mean, if I say no to my kid and they pull out their gastrostomy button, that's a difficult situation to deal with. That's actually why I think so many kids learn that one, because it's very effective, right? They put out their button. No, I got to make sure that never happens again because they only got, 20 minutes to get it stuck back in. So what do? Give them what they want. Or really horrible situation, I worked with a parent on this one, had to do with balloons. And there was a place at the store where they shopped which had balloons for sale. And this kid wanted a balloon, right? So, okay, I'll give you one balloon. No, this kid wanted all the balloons. That's a little bit more difficult. So if I say no, just one, and the kid has a huge temper tantrum, that's embarrassing, not just on the level of having a kid have a temper tantrum, but now you got a kid who looks weird having a temper tantrum. And that's a double whammy. I mean, it's really tough for us to deal with. We don't want that, right? So how do you get them out of the store and still do your other shopping with only one balloon? No, I just buy the whole bloody mess of them and we'll be okay. This was a kid, by the way, who owned 14 vacuum cleaners. Really liked vacuum cleaners. Had quite a collection. This is also a kid whose mom took him to the hospital and said, "He's yours," and drove home. Very, very bad situation. They're reconciled. She's a wonderful person. She's doing a much better job today. But it's tough. So how do you not spoil the kid? So I want to talk a little bit about discipline and what do I have here? They don't get a pass on discipline because they've got charge syndrome, okay? That does not mean you get away with whatever you want. I mean, Jacob used to splash in the bathtub a lot. I'll mention that, I think, tomorrow. And, but the other thing was turning on the water. So you turn on the water, right? I don't mind him being in the bathtub for a long time, but keep turning on the water. That was a pain. So I learned to go over to him, and I make a very serious face. And I would sign stop. Stop! Whoa. Dad's a little upset with me. Why can't I be? Right? I'm a father. Oh, no. But he's got disabilities. He doesn't know any different. Yes, he does. He absolutely knows he's turning on the water. This kid's not very high functioning. He's high functioning enough for that. Right? So why let him? I mean, I could sit there, turn off the water every time he turned it on. Good dad. No, actually bad dad. I've got to teach him something. And you know, interesting thing is the kids who work with him next door will call me sometimes. I think as they say frequently, his dad can get him to do anything. Yeah, because he knows I mean it, right? He has a hot tub. I know this kid is spoiled that way. He does have a hot tub. And the big problem is getting him out of the hot tub. And we have a system, but he has pulled several of his caregivers into the hot tub. But typically dad can go over and glare at him, out. Okay, all right, right? But he gets out of the hot tub. So remember that behavior is communication. So when they're making those demands, why is this kid asking for balloons, right? Well, there are many hypotheses which I could give you, but one is something they can get, right? It's part of the routine. I'll take you over here, and I'll stand here till you buy me all the balloons. And if you don't, there will be consequences. But it's part of the routine, right? We can't let those routines get started. So behavior, if we need that routine, actually what we did with this kid is we developed a pie chart with little pieces of pie, and we took him to the store. Okay, and he knew if he got every piece to the pie, he would get a balloon. but it was one balloon. Each piece of the pie was tied into an object to purchase. So he could get the yogurt, he got a piece of the pie. When he went and got the meat, he got a piece of the pie. And he ran around that store, gathering the things that he needed, ran over, got his one balloon, and that point was satisfied because he'd actually contributed to the whole shopping experience. It was really, really nice. And understanding that he's been communicating something that he needed. Really hard to figure out what, but we can't ignore that forever. I probably do this today and tomorrow, don't I? All right, it's worth telling you twice. No, I'll just tell you today, and tomorrow I'll skip right over it. We'll be running out of time tomorrow. We may today too, but I don't think so. So Jacob, as I mentioned, loves baths. He would stay in the bathtub all day long. Any of your kids do that same thing, baths? It's very, very common in Charge. They love the water. But, of course, he wants to have a bath at the most inconvenient time for me, right? Because I'm an important person. I have things to do. I can't always be giving you a bath whenever you want one. And I did have to sit in there with him because it wasn't so much the faucets, it was the splashing, and I didn't want the whole bathroom to be flooded. So I have to sit with you. So this is going to be not fun. So why would he always pick a time when I was busy to demand the bath? So he would come and get me, and he'd start leading me by the arm towards the bathroom. I knew what he wanted. So I'm signing to him, no, 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 no bath, no, 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 no. And he's dragging me towards the bathtub. I'm dragging him the other direction now. So we're tugging with each other while Dad's going, no, no, no. And it didn't end, it was not a pretty ending, right? I would have a temper tantrum, he would have a temper tantrum, but it just didn't go well. So my wife said to me one day, Tim, do you think that Jacob knows that you know that he wants a bath? Well, sure, I'm signing no. He knows you're signing no, but do you know what it is that he wants? Does he know that you know you're signing what you're signing no about? You're just signing no, like any mean father. You know, we just say no, right? So I thought about that. Well, I thought he knew that I knew he wanted a bath, but maybe not. So we'll see what happens. So the next time he got me and started leading me towards the bathroom, I went right along with him. We went into the bathroom, and I signed what? And he signed bath. And I said, no, bath's finished. He turned around and walked out. There's no temper tantrum on my part or his part, right? We communicated. I showed him that I understood him. We can't assume that our kids always know that we understand them unless we communicate that back to them. That's an incredibly important part of discipline, is making sure the child knows why you're disciplining them. You know, it just can't be a random thing. Well, I don't know what I did. I know I did something they didn't like because now I'm unhappy. But no, no, no. We have to let them be aware of what it is that we're concerned about. Then behavior has to have consequences. It just really does. If you want to teach a child anything about their behavior, there are two major kinds of consequences, natural and logical consequences. Natural consequences are what would happen if you did nothing. Okay, so if my child refuses to eat and I do nothing, okay, they'll probably get hungry. And then maybe they'll want to eat later. If my child runs out in the street and I do nothing, they'll probably get hit by a car. I don't want that one to happen, right? But the others, you know, with our kids, not Jacob so much, although he's pretty good with laundry. We just told them at a young age, you do your own laundry. If you want clean clothes, do your laundry. Because if we didn't do it and my child didn't do it, what was the consequence? The natural consequence is they had stinky clothes. Now, a lot of moms can't tolerate that, but when you step in, you're teaching them mom will always rescue you, which might not be a bad thing. I mean, I think my mother lived about 103, and she rescued me many times, all the way up to the end. But that's not really teaching them anything about consequences. I used to wear socks that never matched because I didn't care. I just put 2 random socks on. My mother would say, Tim, you need to match your socks. I don't care, Mom. One day in 6th grade, I'll never forget it. I was sitting in class, and the teacher walked by me, and she said, Tim, your socks don't match. Everybody in the class laughed. My socks have matched every day since then. So even with charge, we can be thinking, what is the natural consequence? Because it works much better for our kids to discover the natural consequence of an act than for us to have to intervene in the situation. The less we have to do, the better for everybody. Now, it can be very hard to establish good natural consequences with charge. And I understand that. And that's why we have logical consequences. Logical consequences are the things that we set up with our child ahead of time, saying that if you do this, then this is what I'm going to have to do. They're called logical because we try to make the consequence reasonable in terms of the crime. So if my kid's thing is running outside to the street, I'm going to say, look, if you want to start bolting out there and towards the street, you're probably going to have to go to your room and stay there because it's safer for you. I can't have you out in the street. So let's have a little agreement now. I see you heading for the street. I'm going to grab you, and you're going to spend some time in your room. That's kind of logical, right? There are many ways that we can establish these logical consequences. But what happens so often the time, some of you may have experienced this as kids. You did something stupid, and what'd you lose? No TV for 2 weeks. Problems with that. The TV was completely unrelated to whatever it was you were doing, right? You came in late, you didn't clean the dishes, whatever you were supposed to have done. So that made no sense. Plus, your parents rarely made it last a whole 2 weeks. So the threat was kind of meaningless to begin with. It's like, you're going to be grounded for a year. Yeah, right. It'll probably be 2 days. So it doesn't work terribly well. But, it's much better if you can make the consequence something that communicates to the child, hey, it's your choice here. I used an example, I think, in a small group today about, no, I can't remember when I did. It doesn't matter. Okay, so this guy who's very skilled at parenting, by the way, wrote parenting textbooks, but his daughter was going to the prom, and he said, that's just fine, because normally she had to do some chores that evening. But he said, that's just fine. You can go to the prom as long as you get your chores done in that afternoon that you would normally do in the evening. If you get them done in the afternoon, no problem, you go to the prom. So he's waiting the day of the dance. She wasn't doing her chores. He didn't say a word. You don't have to. And then, it got to time she started to change her clothes. So, honey, I thought you decided not to go. She said, no, I'm going to the prom. I said, well, no, wait a minute. You must have decided not to because we agreed that you were going to do your chores in the afternoon so you go to the prom. Right. And she did not go to the prom. You can't back down on these kinds of things if you want to teach anybody that behavior has consequences. Choices have consequences. So keep this in mind. You're going to have to modify it a bit for the situation with your child. And if anybody has specific situations you want to ask me about, even we can find a translator if necessary. I'm happy to do that to help you think through what would be a good logical or even natural consequence for a situation that you're experiencing. When we get to destructive and aggressive behavior, consequences don't necessarily work as well. Certainly not really in terms of stopping the temper tantrum or the meltdown. That's not a good point for consequences. Consequences should have occurred much earlier. When your child is becoming very aggressive or doing something like even pulling their gastrostomy button out, it's really important to stay calm. If you are not calm, if you express a great deal of upset, they will pick that up. And they'll either be glad they made you upset or they'll be scared that you're so upset. But neither one is a really good option. So our staying calm is the first strategy. And if you're a couple and you can help each other stay calm, that's even better. It's hard. One of my sons would very rarely, but occasionally, kind of lose his control, be angry, and my wife would want to keep talking to him. I'd say, she's not here so I can tell you the story. She's up in the bedroom. She's not feeling that great, but anyway, she would keep talking to him. Say, quiet, don't talk to him. Let him, just leave it alone, right? He'd go in his room, slam the door. She still wanted to go, leave it alone. Give them 5 minutes. I could walk in there and I'd say, Seth, I know, sorry, Dad. But you have to understand that we can't impose ourselves too much when it's really hot and heated. That's just not the time to do it. So try to stay calm, as uneasy as that is. But if you get aroused, it just increases their arousal. Know your child and their triggers. When does this happen? Under what circumstances do they lose control? Can you learn to predict it? The more you can predict it, the better it is. Chaotic environments are very often going to set off our kids with charge. Also, pain. We'll talk a lot of this next couple of days about the importance of tracking pain in our kids. That can set off temper tantrums. Another important question is, can we change the environment to reduce the negative behavior? I learned this years ago when my oldest son now, he's now 30, well, end of this month he'll be 38, but he was like 4 or 5, and I'd hidden the cookies in our house up high, and he learned how to climb up under the counter and get the cookies. I said, Josh, you're not supposed to be having cookies. That's why I put them up in the cupboard. He looked at me and said, hide them better. So, anyway, where am I here? Can the environment be modified? Can I hide them better? There's no point in having something around that's going to get our kid into trouble. A lot of kids with charge, for some reason, like to destroy television sets. I don't know what it is about television sets, but I have families that go on through their 4 and 5 television sets. My advice is, don't have any more television sets, right? Unless you want to have them destroyed. Little modification of the environment. Watch out as you learn the child's behavior. What kind of response, watch out for, sorry about that. Watch out for how you respond to the child when they engage in really destructive behavior, because your response is a part of a communication between the two of you that communicates a lot to them about the safety that they experience in the relationship. So controlling yourself as much as possible, really, really helpful. All right, I'm doing well here in terms of time. Okay, getting connected. Who understands what you're experiencing? Who really understands? Now, there are some terrific trusted professionals here at the conference who do have a bit of a clue. But it's really only those of us who have a kid with charge who truly get it. We have physicians in the room who are parents. I was a psychologist in the room who's a parent. Probably other professionals in the room who are parents. If we were just the professional part of us, even if we tried hard, I don't think you can actually get it. I have a lecture that I give to my graduate students called Getting It, in which I try to get them some idea of the experience the parents have, but it's still secondary. So being with people, being connected with people who get it, I think is just incredibly, incredibly important. That's why I'm so glad that you're here and so glad that I'm here with you, because I can look at you and say, yeah, I kind of get it. It doesn't mean that there aren't differences in our experiences. Some of your kids are really high functioning, some of them are low functioning, some of them are as cute as can be, and I'm loving this little get together up here. They're going to have a club in a while, and there'll be rules, and we're going to play with cool stuff. Yeah, look what I've got. Which is fine as far as I'm concerned, but it's being with people. There are Facebook pages, right? There are all sorts of different ways that we can connect with one another. I worry about the parents who isolate themselves and do not get involved. Sometimes it's because they're afraid of charge syndrome, whatever that might be. Sometimes it's because they want to keep their misery to themselves. I've always been the kind of person who wanted to reach out and find support in one another. I mean, it's really hard to raise a more typical child. When they said my oldest child, who is typical in most ways, could come home from the hospital after he was born, I thought, what do you mean? You've got to be kidding. You're sending him home from the hospital? That means My wife and I are responsible for keeping him alive after that. How do you do it? You know, I got to get, well, nourishment could be okay. My wife could handle that part of it. But some of the rest of it, I don't know. What were you, changing diapers? I guess I'll have to figure it out. When they sent Jacob home from the hospital, then you had a suction machine and tubes to feed him through his mouth, and you had apnea monitors to make sure he was still breathing, and with alarms and all of these things, and they gave us 20 minutes to teach us how to use them. I mean, that was pure terror. So what do? You reach out. You get connected. We found a woman in the community where we live, her name is Leo, and Leo knows everything about disability and services and resources, and she and her partner have 2 children with severe disabilities. With this back thing I mentioned that we're worried about with Jacob's back, one of the first things Nancy's going to do when we get back to Mount Pleasant is call Leo. You know, we have to have these connections. And by the way, Leo calls Nancy too. In fact, we have cemetery plots next to each other, so we'll all be okay. That's kind of sad, but it's true. I mean, I'm not making that up. So you need help. So join the German Charge Association. If you're not a full member, I'm an honorary member of the German Charge Association. So, but you can all be members and participate. Get together with other families who have a kid with Charge. Even sometimes you're spaced apart. We'll have a Charge picnic in my state of Michigan on July 14th. And my students will coordinate all the activities, and parents from all around the state will come with their child and siblings. And it's just from 10 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But we've been looking forward to it for 2 years because it's a great time to get together and connect and share the laughter and sometimes the private conversations, some of the tears. Go to the conferences. You're here. I don't need to tell you that. Join the Facebook page I mentioned. Connect with parents of children with other disabilities. If you don't have any Chargers in your neighborhood, there may be Prater Willie or Cornelia DeLange or Crew de Choc or Fragile X. Or there are other parents who are dealing with disability issues, and they can be a major source of support. And then always check out whatever services are available for children who are deaf-blind. I know in a lot of the countries of people who are here, that's more difficult. In the States, every state has a deaf-blind project with expertise that you can contact for consultation. Something to work for. I love showing this picture. It's from 2 years ago here. So when they have the photography that Claudia mentioned, go outside. And I tried to get out there in time. I didn't make it. I think we were doing consultation till the last minute, so we missed the picture. But as you look, and some of you will see yourselves in the picture, I mean, people look happy, don't they? But they have kids with Charge syndrome. How can they possibly be happy? Because they're together in a safe place where everybody gets it. We need these kinds of experiences. That's what getting connected is all about. So do it as much as you can. Don't isolate yourself. If you have a concern, post it on Facebook, call a friend, email me. I mean, there are all sorts of ways that you can get those resources that you need. Don't try to do it alone. This is way, way too complicated to do alone. You know, Nancy and I, it's been this issue, then this issue, then this issue for 29 years. We're used to it, but we always, always reach out because we can't do this thing alone. So get connected. All right, acceptance and advocacy. Okay, try to remember exactly where I was going with this one. Yeah, I'll go to the next slide because I think it's good. Your child has charge. It's tough on everyone. Move on. Okay. Now that sounds a little harsh, but we have to. Our lives don't stop when we have a child with Charge syndrome. Right? You still have a life. You should have a life. I mean, and I understand circumstances can make that very, very difficult. I'll come back to this with my last slide, but if you don't do things for yourself, you'll be much less used to your child. You just have to figure that one out. My wife, for a long time, it was taekwondo, martial arts, and she wanted me to do it too, and I went to one of the meetings and said, this is stupid. Everybody's just marching around and banging things. No, this is not for me. But it was fine for me to stay home with the kids. Well, she went and did taekwondo. She became a 3rd-degree black belt. So whenever Nancy says she wants something, I say, yes, dear, because she can take me down. I know she can. But the important thing is she was doing something for her. So you can't just stay stuck. We have to figure out ways to move on. Learn to accept and love your child with no need for your child to be any different. I have said this a lot over the years, and every time I say it, I wonder if I'm able to do it. This is so much harder. It says, oh, sure, love my child just as he is. That's hard because I want him to be different. I want him to be so much different. I want him to give me more. I want more from him. I don't want to just make him hug me. I want him to say, Daddy, right? I want him to be healthy. I want him to learn to experience the world that he can't seem to get out there and do. But every time I tune into my wishes, I'm asking him to not be Jacob Hartshorne. I'm asking him to be somebody different. I have to be able to look at him and say, Jacob, this is just who you are. And I'm fine with that. I can love you if nothing ever changes with you. If you stay stuck at this level, that's fine. It's okay. We will handle it, and I will be perfectly content with that. I can do that some of the time, but it is a struggle. So if you struggle with that, don't feel bad about it. Nancy and I have been talking about this he's 29 years old. I think at least 28 years when we first thought about this, we need to really be able to accept him as he is. Because at the same time, we have to be strong advocates for our kids. We have to fight with the medical doctors and tell them what we think their kid needs and they're not giving them. We have to fight with the school system and tell the school, you're not doing your job for my kid. You need to do more physical therapy. You need to do more speech pathology. You need to have him in more of an inclusive setting so he can have friends. You need to do better because my kid's going to do things. I remember Jacob was included in regular classes, even though he wasn't capable of following what was going on. He was happy there. His classmates were happy to have him there. But every year the principal would say, are we going to do this inclusion again next year? And then she followed it up one time by saying, because we need to think about what's best for Jacob. If I could have strangled her at that moment, I would have, because I spent my life trying to think what's best for Jacob, as is my wife. And we thought inclusion was best for him. I really wanted, in hindsight, I kept on thinking I was going to say, oh, how should I do this? There's a little swear word which enters into it. But I don't give a blank about what's good for Jacob. I want to preserve my own naive fantasies about his life. I don't care if my fantasies are naive. Nancy said when Jacob was in kindergarten, someday Jacob's going to live in his own home. And I laughed. Come on, this kid live in his own home? You're crazy, wife. The day Jacob lives in his own home. If you don't dream these things, they won't happen. You've got to dream them. So here you are simultaneously saying to your kid, don't have to change, it's just fine. We're going to do everything I can to make you change. That is hard to do at the same time, but that's what we're doing all the time as parents. And that's why sometimes we are fighting like crazy and crying like crazy, and other times we're basking in the joy of who this child really is. It is hard. Don't blame yourself if you have trouble with that. Also remember, you're your child's primary and often sole advocate. I remember Nancy and I looking at each other and saying, I wonder when the case manager is going to come by and manage all the problems with Jacob. Now, of course, the case manager never came by because there was no case manager. We had to look at ourselves and say, Jacob's case manager? That's us, right? And accepting that fact really actually helped us because we no longer looked for other people to take over what really had to be our role. As hard as our role might be, that was what we had to do. So again, your job is to fight like heck to get what your child needs, but find allies. Doing this alone, even as a couple, is too hard. We have Leo, for example, our friend in Mount Pleasant, but we have other people too that we can call on. In fact, we've worked really hard to develop sources of support all over the state of Michigan, all over the country, because turns out I know a few things about disability and CHARGE syndrome, and so does my wife. And so we can come down with the expert card and say, that's right, I gave a talk in Germany 3 weeks after I gave a talk in Australia. And I've given talks on CHARGE in the Netherlands and in England and in New Zealand and in France. And, oh, he must be an expert. No, I just fake it really well. I feel like that sometimes. So find allies. There was a parent in the U.S. who used to talk about going out to the school to tame the wolves. That's the school people. And sometimes they seem like wolves because they're tearing us apart. She said that her solution was to go and be the parent from hell. Any of you the parent from hell? Yeah, Claudia, Julie, you've been the parent from hell. I know you have. It's survival for many of us. And I hate it when you go to the school and you're just nasty to them, but how else you can get them to listen? It's really not a great situation because you know what happens? You go to school as the parent from hell, and you're arguing with a principal, or you're arguing with a teacher, and you're demanding this and demanding that, and they're telling you why you're nuts and why you can't have this and you can't have that, and you finally leave the school. What the teacher doesn't know is that you go to your car, you strong, brave person, and you sob, you cry. And what you don't know is the teacher goes to the teacher's restroom, toilet, and sits in there and cries. This didn't work out well for anybody. So I think it's so important for us to figure out ways to communicate with each other because we all ought to be on exactly the same side. How can we create the best environment in the school for our child? There are a lot of issues around this, and I'm going to just mention a few of them. And one of the issues that parents sometimes deal with, especially with the medical people, is diagnosis. And this particular cartoon says, these are our specials. And the specials are learning disability, but that's crossed out. And emotionally disturbed, that's crossed out. ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that's crossed out. The other one available to you right now is autism. That's the diagnosis of the day. And it seems like it is, and we're going to be talking about that tomorrow, trying to persuade you to avoid going down those paths because we don't think they're extremely helpful to you or to your child. But it is troubling when you start getting all these different diagnoses heaped on your kid, and you're wondering, boy, I thought my kid was bad enough with CHARGE, and now it turns out they have all these other things. No, they have CHARGE. It's good. Then they start making predictions, deciding on treatment for your child. So how do they decide how much speech pathology you should have? How do they decide how much physical therapy? You know, when Jacob was an infant, we went to the school and they said, the physical therapist said, oh, he can really benefit from physical therapy. And so the administrator said, okay, so a half hour every other week. I said, excuse me, sir, I just heard he can benefit from physical therapy. A half hour every other week? And they said, well, that's what we can offer. Yeah, but that doesn't make sense. If he needs it, why can't we offer more? Well, we don't have that many physical therapists around. And that's supposed to be my problem or my child's problem? So I said, well, you know, I hate to go through the legal process on this, but it seems to me if he needs physical therapy, he should get physical therapy. And someone said, well, what about so-and-so? And Jacob was the first kid in our county to get weekly physical therapy. But you had to fight it because why are they making this determination? So you do have the fortune teller says, I see 2 sessions of PT, OT, and speech therapy weekly. Right? How do they decide? That's what it's supposed to be. And then below it says, the district's experimental method for determining related services works just as well as making those decisions before knowing a students' IEP goals and other learning outcomes. It's bad. We need to know what the learning outcomes are supposed to be. When they wanted to reduce Jacob's services for speech, and I said, well, let's look at his IEP and see if that's enough time for speech. And no one said a word, because I had them. His number one goal was communication and speech. Communication. You remember word problems when you're taking maths? So here's a word problem. It's a mediation exam. During a 1-hour meeting, if a parent speaks about her child's educational needs at 120 words per minute, and the professional listens listens to 65 of those words per minute, while simultaneously scanning 8 pages of the student's file, how many years will it take for them to understand each other? We need to be talking to each other, with each other, and not at each other. I don't know if you been to IEP meetings or school meetings to decide on the child's plan, but this has been kind of my experience. You know, are you outnumbered? The caption says, I'm not sure why Mr. Barth always feels compelled to bring an advocate to the IEP meeting. You're outnumbered. I counted one of Jacob's IEP meetings, 17 people sitting around the room, and they were going to be telling me what should happen for my son. I was a professional school psychologist with a doctoral degree, and I was intimidated, right? This is not the way it's supposed to be. What I wasn't fully aware of, I mentioned this at a talk years ago that I did at the university, and the woman who had been Jacob's home teacher that came to our house when he was an infant was in the audience, and she came up to me afterwards and said, do you know how much you and Nancy intimidated everybody at the school? I said, no, I didn't have any idea, but I'm really glad because that's why you get what you need. Predictions. So have you had predictions, someone telling you your child will never walk, they'll never talk, never eat by themselves, never be able to do anything at school? Total nonsense. But I hear this so often from parents who say, we were told this stuff. No, we have no idea how well your kid's going to do, but there's no reason to think they might do some really terrific things. If I've learned anything about CHARGE syndrome, it is never say never. Did we think Jacob was going to walk? We knew Jacob would walk someday. Did the school believe us? No, they would roll their eyes when we said, well, when Jacob starts walking, right? And Jacob was 7. Granted, he took a while. But the first day he walked to school, and the first time he walked anywhere was at school. And he walked from his classroom out to the bus all by himself. He got out to the schoolyard. The children cheered. Teachers were crying. It was a huge experience for all of them. But don't say never. They thought he'd never lose his gastrostomy button. We actually took it out against medical advice. He was eating enough by mouth. We thought he'd be fine. So we took it out and we told his pediatrician, oh, it just fell out and we didn't notice and we couldn't get it back in, so we think we should just leave it out now. Yeah, we lie. But we didn't think they would. They had already told us, don't take it out. Don't take it out. So predictions. Decisions about a child's life. Someone in the family should be wearing the pants. Excuse me, but I think those are our pants. You know, the school people can't be making these decisions. These decisions are too difficult. They're too serious. They're too important. You know, when we said we thought Jacob should be in an inclusion classroom, the school didn't agree with us. Tough baloney. That's our decision. We have to make that. We have to live with the consequences of our decision too. But once we make the decision, guess what? It's your job, school, to make it work. Right? We make the decision, you make it work. It's a reasonable decision. We had experts come in saying it was a reasonable decision. You guys make it work. Because what happens, of course, is they let it not work, and then they call and blame the parents. Say, no, you're not going to get away with that. Jacob's going to be included. And it was, I think, a very, very good solution for him. I like to talk about these marathon skills. The author of these, Ann Turnbull, is a stepmother of a young man with, well, he's probably an old man by now, with Down syndrome, but he was fairly young when she wrote an article about the marathon skills. You know the difference between a marathon and a sprint, right? So a marathon is long distance, a sprint's very short. If you're going to sprint, you can give it everything you've got, because if you die at the end, it's okay. It's a short distance, and you can then collapse. With a marathon, if you take out running really, really fast, you're going to collapse before you get to the end of the marathon. You have to pace yourself. Raising a lot of our children my mother said, well, the time of your life with kids is kind of short. Yeah, it wasn't for me. My first kid was 1980, and I still have a kid home in the summers. But it's a marathon. You have to pace yourself. So what are the skills, strategies that we need to develop that allow us to run this marathon and see it to its conclusion? So the first of the marathon skills is meet your own basic needs. And I referred to this before. If you're not eating, sleeping, earning a living, taking care of yourself, you're not doing your child any good at all. In fact, I think a basic need is to do something that's actually enjoyable for you. So like the taekwondo that Nancy did. And I understand these things take time, and time away from the family may be very difficult, certainly at certain moments of the child's life. But what I don't want to happen to you is that you end up at 80 years old and your kid is still living with you and you've never had a life. I mean, you deserve it as much as your kid deserves it. You really do. You can sacrifice yourself for your kids, but older people who have spent their life just sacrificing for their children are not people you want to be around. They're not happy people. So figure out, what is it I really need in my life? Maybe it's time with the guys, going out with the girls. It doesn't have to be all the time. Maybe I need a half hour of peace and quiet. There's a strategy that I don't know always works well with Charge, but it's when you can't take care of your kids anymore, you go lock yourself in the bathroom. Lock yourself in the bathroom and come out when it's quiet. Hope your kid's still alive, but it has saved me a few times. Okay, meet basic needs. Know yourself and your family. Who are you as a person? Who are you as an adult? Who are you as a parent of somebody with CHARGE syndrome? How about the rest of your family? Who is your spouse? Who are they as a parent of CHARGE syndrome? What about the siblings if you have other children? You know, what is their experience like? And by the way, in general, siblings do extremely well. I can just, not 100%, but in general, they do extremely well. But you need to know who these people are. You need to be able to spend time with all of them. If all your time is focused just on your child with CHARGE, your other siblings are missing out. You can't allocate the time equally. And my kids all knew that. You know, that Jacob was going to take the most amount of time. And today, they're all planning for Jacob's future together. I'm going to do this part of it. I'm going to watch out for his finances. I'm going to make sure that we've got good caregivers for him. I'm going to do whatever. They're kind of putting it together for themselves. Because they knew Jacob's well-being takes more work than anybody else's well-being. And they're okay with that. But their well-being still has to be attended to. You can't ignore it. Love unconditionally. I mentioned this already. No conditions. Jacob, you can be exactly who you are. I don't care if anything changes in your life. Easy to say, harder to do. Although as parents, I think it's something kind of natural in many of us, at least with our typical kids. Although there are times they really annoy me so much. I learned when they were young to go into their room at night when they're sleeping because they're so cute. And I'd say, okay, you can live another day. If you get to that point, try that. It really works. Establish relationships. I said to get connected. Establish those relationships with your friends. I know what happened. You had your kid with CHARGE. Your friends all disappeared, right? And if you're fortunate, one or two hung around. Now we have a whole new set of friends. My best friends in the world, actually, David Brown, Rob Last, I mean, the people who are here. We don't see each other often enough, but we have a really strong connection. But we have to have those relationships, or I just can't make it. Experience and benefit from emotions. It's perfectly okay to sob uncontrollably. You will control yourself eventually. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to say, I didn't deserve this. This is too much for me. Because it is. You did not deserve this. Although, I think it's so exciting that you got it. Because I think this is fun. Hard fun. But you may not see that much of the time. But it's okay. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to despair. If you deny those feelings, you're not being human, and you're really not doing your kid any good. Because those feelings will not stay with you all the time. And if you allow yourself to express them, you can move on. Take charge. As I said, no one else is going to do it. You have to take charge of the situation. And I'm not that assertive of a person. I'm really not. And you know, Nancy also dealt with the school people for the most part. When it came to the serious issues, I had to call the superintendent. Now I can do it. I'm okay with that. But we had to take charge of the situation, and I had to call the superintendent and say, this cannot continue, and it didn't. You know, we got additional services. So take charge. Do what you have to do. If you have to tell a medical person that they're full of it, tell them. They need to know sometimes. And if they drop you from their practice, you might be better off finding a different practice. Anticipate the future. We talked about that this morning, or whatever time it is. It's late this afternoon. The future is always going to be changing. I said Nancy decided when Jacob was in kindergarten that someday he would live in his own home. That's a lot of transitions to get there. Every transition from a new school to, of course, just different age groups. Becoming an adolescent when he suddenly got testosterone shots, right? And starts becoming a man. Transitioning from caregiver to caregiver, or intervener to intervener. I mean, life is full of these. We had to think, back when he was an infant, what will happen when we get to kindergarten? And then kindergarten, what will happen when he moves into elementary? And we planned for those very deliberately. We worried a lot about it. We worried a lot about adult services, because adult services, as some of you know, are not generally very good. But we had to establish them as best we were able. So, as difficult as it is, keep anticipating what's the next event coming along, and how can we prepare ourselves, how can we prepare our child, and how can we prepare whoever's going to be dealing with our kid after this transition to make it work. Then establish balance in your life. I never know quite what to say when I get to this one, because I'm not sure that I have balance in my life. So the rest of them I kind of can do more or less, but the balance one is hard. But I think as I think about life in general, there are three areas that we really need to kind of be thinking about. One is our love life. You know, having a relationship with somebody doesn't have to always be romantic, but having somebody in our life that we know that we can count on whenever we really absolutely need somebody. We need that love experience, that commitment to our relationship, because that's kind of a foundation for our being able to go out and deal with other relationships we have to deal with. So balancing that against work life. And I used to go to work during the day, and 5 o'clock would come around, and I think, oh damn, I have to go home to my next job, which is taking care of Jacob. So that's as much work as anything else. But can I balance that work out with other kinds of work, and balance that again with my love relationships? And there's friendships. You know, even though many of the friendships that I had before Jacob disappeared, I've been able to establish new friendships. And yet many of them are in different places around the world. There's still some right in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, where I'm from. But so I think when I say establish balance, really talking about being able to balance the major kinds of life tasks that we have in life, to have friends and be friendly, to have love and have some commitment, and to have work that we can feel good about that we're doing and being productive in our lives. That's the best I can give you on that one. If you figure out something more about balance, I'd love to hear about it, because I'm still working that one up. So I think, yeah. So that's it. I hope those hints or tips are helpful to you. I appreciate your feedback. I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Vielen Dank, Tim. Ja, es ist fast 8.
Thank you, Tim. It's almost 6 p.m. Starting at 6, we'll have dinner in the back, but if there's not enough room there, you can also go downstairs to have your dinner. And we thought that starting at about 7:30 rather, 7:30 we'll start with a round of introductions. We thought we wouldn't have every person present themselves. I'll just call out the name of the family. You'd get up, say, that's us. Because after all, we do have more than 70 families here. That would take too long. And as for tonight, we also have a barbecue for breadsticks planned for kids and adults. So I hope you'll have a wonderful evening, and if you like, be back again at 7:30. Thank you.